testimony on the posture of the U.S. Air Force in its fiscal year 2019 budget request. We welcome our witnesses, Secretary Heather Wilson and General David Goldfein. Fein is fine. See, we remember that. The Air Force is at a critical moment in its history. It faces a dual task of digging out of a readiness crisis while at the same time managing a broad modernization effort. You do not have the luxury of choosing one or the other. You got to do both. I was pleased to see increases in the budget request for fiscal year 2019 to address both readiness and modernization, but I'm interested to hear from you how the Air Force will manage this balance in the years ahead, particularly if Budget Control Act funding levels return in 2020. And I continue to be concerned with the availability of aircraft and the preparedness of our airmen. The trends in pilot retention remain troubling with the current shortage of some 2,000 pilots. You know, it wasn't long ago we were using the figure 1,500. So it's not getting any, it doesn't seem to be getting any better. We need to address that. The NDS makes clear that space is and will continue to be contested environment. Both Russia and China continue their robust efforts to extend warfighting into the outer space, and we can no longer take our space-enabled capabilities for granted. All of this makes our dismal space failures even more detrimental. Despite recent reforms, lasting change will require your leadership and vision to sustain a whole-of-government approach. Finally, I look forward to hearing about the progress of the Air Force nuclear modernization efforts. As we heard in the Nuclear Posture Review earlier this year, we can't afford to stand still in this area when our adversaries have been investing in their nuclear forces for the last 2 decades. I know the Air Force has been working hard on the new bomber and missile programs, as well as new engines for the B-52. You know, new engines for B-52. I just noticed that the life extension now is going to be 2050. It'll be, what, 100 years old by that time. Well, anyway, Senator Reid.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And let me
I was thinking about that.
Let me join you in welcoming Secretary Wilson and General Goldfein. Thank you for your service, and thank you for your great leadership at the United States Air Force. We're grateful also to the men and women of the Air Force who do so much, and please convey to them our deep appreciation and thanks, as you always do. Our witnesses this morning face huge challenges as they strive to balance the need to support ongoing operations and sustained readiness with the need to modernize and keep the technological edge in the 3 critical domains of air, space, and cyberspace. The Air Force has produced a budget that, even with proposed budget increases, reflects very tough decisions. The budget increases the Air Force is proposing fiscal year 2019 would seek to increase readiness, address shortfalls in munitions, address shortfalls in pilots and maintenance personnel, and modernize our strategic deterrent capability. In addition, the Air Force faces a continuing challenge in managing the cost and progress of its major acquisition programs, including the Joint Strike Fighter, the most expensive DoD acquisition program in history, and a new tanker and a new bomber. We should hear from our witnesses on progress in all 3 of these programs this morning. I would also like to hear more about another modernization program. In this budget, the Air Force is proposing to truncate the program to modernize the Joint Surveillance and Target Radar System, or JSTARS program. The Air Force deserves our careful consideration of this proposal, but we must consider it against the recent history of abrupt Air Force program changes. The Air Force tried several years to retire the A-10 fleet. Congress turned down the proposals. Now the Air Force is keeping the A-10 and will continue experimenting with a new light attack aircraft called OAX that would undoubtedly be less survivable than the A-10. Spending for OAX could cost the Air Force several $100 million or more. The Air Force supported a non-McCurdy certification that the Global Hawk remotely piloted vehicle was critical to national security, and then proposed canceling the program in favor of the U-2 program within a few months of the Global Hawk certification. Later, the Air Force wanted to cancel the U-2 program in favor of the Global Hawk. The Air Force first proposed to retire nearly half of the Compass Call aircraft without replacement, then decided that modernizing the Compass Call program was so important that they had to pursue a sole source contracting strategy for the program. The Air Force was pursuing a program to buy the C-27 airlift aircraft because Air Force witnesses said that the C-130 airlift aircraft could not meet their requirements. Later, the Air Force canceled the C-27 program and said that the C-130 was perfectly fine for meeting the direct support mission. With regard to the JSTARS program, the Air Force originally proposed to retire a sizable portion of the current fleet of JSTARS aircraft with no immediate replacement in sight. When Congress turned down that proposal, the Air Force submitted a modernization plan to replace the existing capability with a new business jet and a new radar. The contract to implement the JSTARS modernization plan is currently in source selection, but now, as I mentioned earlier, the Air Force's fiscal year 2019 budget proposes to cancel that JSTARS solicitation and pursue another path. The Air Force has mentioned the National Defense Strategy as a reason for making this decision, but the indications about the decision seem to have been made before the National Defense Strategy. I look forward to hearing about updating these efforts and all your efforts, including progress on improving shortfalls within the remotely piloted aircraft community and shortfalls within the larger pilot personnel community. Again, thank you very much for your committed leadership to the Air Force, and thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Senator Reed, Secretary Wilson, and General Goldfein. We want to hear your opening statements. We'll start with you, Secretary Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to, with consent, to put my entire statement in the record.
Without objection.
And just summarize a few points. First of all, Mr. Chairman and Senator Ranking Member Reed, thank you very much for the hearing today. I'd like to highlight a few things that are in our fiscal year 19 budget proposal. The budget proposal for fiscal year 19 does align with the National Defense Strategy. And we developed this budget proposal at the same time the National Defense Strategy was being drafted, and so there's a direct influence there. The National Defense Strategy recognizes that we face a more competitive and dangerous international security environment than we have faced in decades. Great power competition has reemerged as the central challenge for U.S. security and prosperity. There are what I would say are two bold moves in this budget and one continuing theme. With respect to the bold moves and the changes, we are accelerating defendable space to deter, defend, and prevail against anyone who seeks to deny our ability to freely operate in space. There is an 18% increase from the fiscal year 18 five-year defense plan to the fiscal year 19 five-year defense plan in space. And there's a significant changes there. The second bold move is the shift to multi-domain operations, particularly with respect to command and control. And the way in which we do command and control in a disaggregated way rather than relying on a platform-centric upgrade, which is the JSTARS program. So those are the two large shifts and changes driven by the environment within which we find ourselves. The continuing theme and the continuing effort is to keep improving the readiness of the force to win any fight, anytime. In fiscal year 17, we kind of started to turn the corner. The additional resources added by the Congress in fiscal year 18 are helping us start to climb out of a readiness deficit. And the fiscal year 19 proposal, with the budget certainty that the Congress has given us, will help us to restore the readiness of the force. And I wanted to thank you publicly for that effort. We need that certainty, and we are committed to using the dollars which you appropriate wisely in the defense of the nation. Chief.
Thank you, Senator Inhofe, Ranking Member Reed, distinguished members of the committee. It's an honor for Secretary Wilson and I to represent 670,000 airmen as we update you on the Air Force and our budget proposal for 2019. And I'll begin by thanking this committee for its leadership in building and then gaining approval for a historic budget that will continue the rebuilding of the U.S. military as we return to an era of great power competition. And central to this effort was the perseverance, tenacity, and leadership of Chairman John McCain, who we know is recovering today in his beloved Arizona. As airmen, we'll never forget that he shared his Vietnam POW experience with men like Bud Day and Lance Sijon. We admire his leadership and wish him and his family our warmest regards as he takes on this latest challenge. And we hope to see him soon in these hallowed chambers. A fitting testimony to his unwavering dedication and commitment, this budget request allows our nation to confront today's threats and moves us towards an Air Force we need to face tomorrow's challenges. As airmen, we first defend the homeland and our allies with a safe, secure, and effective nuclear deterrent. And we're expected to own the high ground with air and space superiority. And as stated in the National Defense Strategy, we're expected to project America's military power forward with our allies and our partners as we bring global vigilance, global reach, and global power to the joint team. This historic budget we discussed today continues the recovery you set in motion in 2017 when we stopped the continued erosion of our readiness following years of budget instability. In 2016, our pilots averaged just 17 hours of flying time per month. We were able to advance that number to 19 hours in 2018, and with this budget, we begin restoring pilot proficiency to 21 hours per month in 2019. Pilots joined to fly, and this budget gets them back in the air. In 2016, we faced a shortage of over 4,000 maintainers. In 2018, we'll reduce that number to almost zero. 10 years of maintenance experience lost cannot be gained overnight, yet this budget builds the foundation for a full recovery. 9 years of continuing resolutions has negatively affected our munitions manufacturers and the industrial base that we will need in a peer fight. Under CRs, we placed industry in a difficult situation to retain capacity and a roster of highly skilled workers with appropriate security clearances without being able to clearly identify what we could afford to purchase each year. This budget request fully funds preferred munitions to industry capacity, allowing for 9,000 line items above FY18 totals. With your continued support of this 19 budget, for the first time in years, we have a national security strategy, a national defense strategy, and a nuclear posture review, and the resources required to support them. Strategic alignment. Said another way, as has been argued so loudly by this committee, for the first time in years, we have a strategy-driven budget versus a budget-driven strategy. And on behalf of all of our airmen, I can only say thank you. However, we also know that we only have visibility on this plan through 2019, and a return to the disastrous budget caps of BCA in 2020 would repeat the damage caused by the 2013 sequester from which we are still recovering as a service. And finally, we're acutely aware that every dollar we're given is a dollar that was earned by Americans, and it is our solemn obligation to remain good stewards of those dollars. Thank you again for the opportunity this morning to testify on behalf of airmen who are standing the watch. Secretary Wilson and I welcome your questions.
Thank you, General Goldfein. I appreciate your comments about Senator McCain, and in his behalf right now, I'll read his statement since a quorum is present. Since a quorum is not present, I ask the committee to consider a list of 256 pending military nominations. Included on this list are the nominations of Admiral Davidson to be Commander, U.S. Pacific Fleet, General O'Shaughnessy to be the Commander of the U.S. Northern Command, or NORAD, and NORAD. All of these nominations have been before the committee and a required length of time. Is there a motion to favorably report this list of 256 pending nominations to the Senate?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Several of us on this committee, Senator Ernst, Senator Rounds, Senator Sullivan, myself, and also a couple members from the House Armed Services Committee, were in the South China Sea, and seeing something that's kind of hard to convince to the American people, that our image in that area is not really up and equal to China's image. We all know about what's happened in terms of the islands that they have created, and they're up over 3,000 acres right now. It's all as if they're preparing for World War III, and those words came from our allies over there, not from me. It's pretty frightening when you see some 7 islands that were illegally created and have nothing except really military equipment, cannons, and all of that. And so we are finding allies that we have there, and we talk to all of them, the Philippines, South Korea, Taiwan, Japan, and they all are, it's almost as if they're taking sides. Who shall it be, China or the United States? Whether we like it or not, that's our current image there. And I am really concerned about giving some kind of assurance to our allies that we are being prepared in a different way that may not be visible now. Do you have any thoughts about that, Secretary Wilson? About reassuring our allies over there that we're in the game?
Mr. Chairman, our responsibility is to be strategically predictable to our allies and to be there, and to be operationally unpredictable to our adversaries.
Good.
The Chief and I went to the Pacific, to the Philippines, South Korea, Japan. The Chief then went on to India.
When was this?
To reassure it in January, to reassure them.
Okay.
Last week we had a Five Eyes meeting, as well as meetings with the Japanese, the French, the Norwegians, and others about our space partnerships, and opened our space schoolhouse to more allies and partners. We are stronger together than we are alone. And I don't know if the Chief wants to talk a little more about our operational partnerships.
And Chief, what I'm getting at here is the image that we have over there, which I'm sure you saw at the same time that you were there.
Yeah. Yes, sir. And what I will tell you is that a big part of the air component story in the Indo-Pacific region is the stability of our forces over time. If you take a look at the drastic reductions that we've taken over time across the Air Force, where we've had to pull forces is primarily from CONUS, or here in the U.S., and in the Europe, where we've come down significantly over the years. If you look at where we are in the Pacific, it's actually been fairly stable over time. And so our commitment to our fellow air chiefs there, and how we exercise, how we operate, whether that's on the Korean Peninsula or throughout the region, has remained stable, and I project it will remain stable over time. And then with this increased budget, it gives us an opportunity to further reinforce that air component solidarity with our allies and partners there in the region.
Okay, I think that's significant, and I appreciate that very much. I wanted to get that on record. Senator Reid mentioned several of the vehicles that are out there that we're modernizing right now, and the one that is of greatest interest to me, perhaps, is the KC-46. When you stop and think about the KC-135 having endured, 59 years, I look at this as something that's going to be probably in that same situation. Secretary Wilson, we're anxious for the first KC-46 to get delivered to the Air Force, and we understand that's going to happen this year. And we've had some delays on the first delivery, and we're all very interested in that. The President's budget had, I think, 15 coming on board, the KC-46. Do you agree that that's an adequate number, an achievable number, and a desirable number?
Yes, sir, I think that's a desirable number. We have had meetings with Boeing and additional meetings last week to get an agreement on a schedule. We believe, the Air Force believes, that the schedule that Boeing has is still overly ambitious, and we'd like to get agreement on a delivery date and drive to that delivery date.
Yeah. And so what do you think about the President's budget having 15 in it, General Goldfein?
Sir, I agree with the Secretary that it's absolutely the desirable number and a sustained number over time as we bring that weapon system on. As you know, I would offer that we're a global power because of our global reach, and it's all the services that rely on that tanker force and our allies and partners to be able to project power globally. So it's a critical capability that we need to bring on as fast as we can bring it on.
Agreed. Thank you. Senator Reid.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. First, let me note that I had the opportunity to go down and visit the B-21 facilities in Florida. and was very impressed with the management, both the Air Force and the contractor. And I know you're paying quite a deal of attention to that, and thank you for your efforts in that regard. I want to go back to the JSTARS issue I raised, and my sense of the back and forth, and it's been over several years, so this is not a recent development, is that originally the aircraft was going to be retired without replacement, and then Congress said no, and then the Air Force came back with a modernization plan for a business jet with a radar, and then went into a source solicitation process for that. And then now in 2019, the proposal is they cancel that solicitation and pursue another path. And some rationale has been the National Defense Strategy, but we got a sense that this was going to be the 2019 proposal even before the NDS came out. So either the Secretary or the Chief of Staff, can you give us some ideas about what's going on?
Senator, we were working on the National Defense Strategy for about 9 months before it was published, and I think the last version that I saw had version 67 on it. So we understood the direction we were going to be guided to go before it was actually published in January. So it did influence our fiscal year 19 budget submission. There are several things that have changed, and I was on the National Security Council staff in 1991. When JSTARS was a new invention. We pushed it forward into the fight when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, and it was a transformative capability. But in 1991, I didn't have a cell phone. Nobody in this room had a cell phone, and technology was different. So is the threat. So the threat is changing, and we've been guided to say, what do we need to do in a contested environment to support the ground operators, because that's what this is about. We know that it won't survive close to the battle area. It looks forward about a couple 100 miles onto the ground to look at what troops are massing out there to attack us. And so we asked them to see if they could come up with a better way to solve the problem. The proposal we put forward integrates multiple sensors, space, air, manned, unmanned, ground, fuses that data instead of having one aircraft doing a loop close to the battle area. We also know that we can keep JSTARS a little. We've looked at the airframes. We think we can keep them a little longer than we thought. That opens this opportunity. We will extend and bring back some AWACS to help as well, and they're a little further off from the forward edge of the battle area. We think we had the engineers come in and scrub this plan so that the technology readiness level is high. We think this is a better answer. And that's why we put it forward in the budget.
General Goldfein, your comments, please.
Yes, sir. First, I'd like to make sure that there's no question in anybody's mind that we are committed to staying shoulder to shoulder with Army, Navy, Marine Corps as we continue to look at the fight in the future. I've been fighting side by side with the Army my entire career. And it's my obligation, I believe, as the Secretary Organized, Train, and Equip, to ensure that any soldier, sailor, Marine, airman who are on the ground who hear jet noise, I never want them to look up. I want them to know it's us, and we owe that to them. So this is about ensuring that we understand the problem that we have to solve, and the problem, as the Secretary has laid out, is that we have to simultaneously be able to provide a common ground picture to an individual on the ground of enemy movement in both a contested and a non-contested environment. And we don't have the luxury of doing it in either or. And so given that challenge, we went back and looked at original assumptions. And you asked, what's changed that caused us to change? The Secretary laid this out. The most fundamental change is that when we did a deep dive into the fuselage, we'd learned that we can fly the current frame through the mid to late 20s, 2028. So the fundamental assumption we started with was that these airplanes were going to stop flying in 2018, so that we had to solve a platform problem with a platform solution. That gave us time to step back and say, is this the best plan? To be able to solve both the contested and uncontested, because we don't want someone in a contested environment on the ground, where we will be, to be blind to enemy movement on day one of that campaign. So given the fact that we can fly longer, we looked at how can we use those resources in a different way to be able to provide that ground-moving target and the battle management simultaneously for both Yemen and Kaliningrad. And the best way forward for us is to move into a multi-domain sensing capability that uses space, leverages where commercial space is going, leverages every platform that we are building as a joint team that does ground moving target indicator, or GMTI, and look at disaggregated command and control. And so the plan we move forward allows us to keep the current capacity through 2028, possibly longer, and gives us 10 years now to build the multi-domain capability to be able to fill in the gaps. And the gap that we have got to fill is that Kaliningrad, China campaign gap in a contested environment.
Just quickly, because my time expired, I understand that, and it's a very logical presentation, but we're starting now with a new concept, and we're at the very beginning stages of trying to develop the many different parts. Is that fair?
It is. Go ahead, ma'am, you want to go? I'll just say that here's one of the things that we're able to do. You know, previously we had to retire. We were going to retire 7 E-3 AWACS. This allows us to not only bring those airplanes up, but to modify them so we can get top secret feeds into AWACS, so they can start getting feeds from all kinds of different platforms and capabilities to do that battle management. Every airplane or every platform the Joint Forces is building that has a electronically scanned radar does that business, and so we have access to more capability. The other thing we're going to do is we're going to take MQ-9s and build a GMTI capability in MQ-9s. So a soldier now will have the capability that he doesn't have today to find, fix, and finish on a single platform based on being able to see movement, put a sensor against it, validate it, fix it, and destroy it with weapons on the wing. So to the soldier on the ground, this is going to be transparent to them. The soldier on the ground in a contested environment is going to be served by the better plan.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Reed. Senator Wicker.
Thank you, and thank you for a bit more optimistic report than we've had in the past years. Let me talk about a problem we still have, the pilot shortage problem in the Air Force, the pilot shortage problem generally, and also pilot training. It's been estimated that there is approximately a 2,000 pilot shortage in the Air Force, including 950 fighter pilots. Boeing reports that North America will need 117,000 more pilots over the next 20 years. So what are we doing about this? Are we going to max out the UPT bases? And what about this somewhat controversial proposal to add a new contract-to-run undergraduate pilot training facility? You want to start first, Madam Secretary?
Senator, I will. You're right that there is a national shortage of pilots. The airlines are going to be hiring over 4,500 pilots a year for the foreseeable future, and they can't hire anyone for the airlines who have less than 1,500 hours of flying time or 750 hours with the Air Force. There is an inverse relationship between hiring in the airlines and retention in the services. We're going to have to face that challenge. We're facing it in 3 different ways. The first is to validate our requirements. How many pilots do we really need? And really scrub those numbers. The second is we're trying to do everything we can to retain the pilots we have with quality of service, quality of life, reducing the operating tempo, giving them more choice and options to be able to manage their own careers so that we keep more pilots on active duty. And they came to serve. So there are ways to increase retention, but retention can't be the only answer. Third is we have to increase the number of pilots we're training. The first step is to maximize the capacity of the pilot training bases that we have. The maximum capacity, we trained about 1,100 pilots last year, I think was the number. The maximum capacity of our current infrastructure is about 1,400 pilots a year.
So that's 3 UPT bases?
Yes, sir. Plus, yes, sir. Shepherd. The current UPT bases we have, it's about 1,400, and it has to do with the airspace, training ranges, runways, ramp space, but it is about 1,400. When you get beyond that, we are looking at whether we should have some flexibility with some contractor undergraduate pilot training, and we are looking at that option. It gives us the ability to increase for a bit and to recover faster, and also to ramp back down without affecting the indigenous Air Force capability. So it is an option that we're looking at. Chief, do you want to?
Sir, I'll just add that as we look at this, as you might imagine, we've been out eyeball to eyeball with our pilot force, listening to them, squinting with our ears to make sure we understand, what are those actions that we could take that would keep them in the Air Force. Because the part we can't control is the overall problem statement, and that is that we as a nation don't produce the pilots we need to adequately service business, commercial, and military aviation. That's a national challenge. We can't control that, but what we can control are those things that we do within the service. And as the Secretary laid out, it's about increasing production, it's about increasing retention through quality of service and quality of life initiatives, and it's about ensuring that we understand with great fidelity the data that drives the requirement for pilots to be able to do the nation's business.
Okay, General, on that last statement, and that follows up on what the Secretary said about validating the requirement, are you saying that the requirement might not quite be 2,000 pilots and it might not quite be 950 pilots? Is that what you're saying?
No, sir. What I'm saying is that where we actually place pilots, because to have a healthy and mature weapon system, you have to have enough pilots that actually fly the aircraft.
Okay, well, are you pretty sure that we're in the ballpark on a 2,000 pilot shortage?
Yes.
Okay. And do we need to be a part of a larger conversation with industry and frankly with our allies about the international pilot shortage? Yes, ma'am.
Sir, I think we do. This is a national shortage. I would say that the only pathway for someone outside of the military to get into the airlines, I mean, there are very few of them, crop dusting, some, flight instructing, or going overseas and flying with a foreign commercial carrier because they don't have the 1,500-hour requirement.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Wicker. Senator Shaheen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Since we're talking about pilots, I was struck by the news coverage of the Southwest problem last week with its engine, and the pilot did such a terrific job. And one of the pieces of that news story was that she had hoped to join the Air Force and had wound up joining the Navy because the Air Force wasn't as open to women. I assume that's no longer a problem.
Senator, I came into the Air Force at about the same time. The Navy opened fighter pilots flying to women earlier than the Air Force, but they couldn't fly in combat. And I was also part of the effort to change that law back in 1991.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I thought it was important to make that point. I want to thank you, Secretary Wilson, for taking time to meet with me last week and for the responsiveness of the Air Force to the issue we have at the former Pease Air Force Base with perfluorinated carbons, or PFCs, which have affected the groundwater. It's an issue not just in New Hampshire, but at military installations across this country. And I also appreciated Assistant Secretary Henderson coming up and meeting with folks in the community. As you know, we had, through the defense bill last year, the authorization, and through the appropriation in the omnibus, we have funding for a health study that's going to be done by the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry through the CDC. And I just wanted to urge you to do everything you can to make sure that that funding gets transferred as expeditiously as possible. We have 1,500 people who have been tested with elevated levels in the Portsmouth area who are anxious about their future and their children's future. And I know there are many people throughout the Air Force and our other military installations who share that concern.
Senator, we will work with you and with HHS as well as CDC to make sure that study is done.
Thank you very much. You talked about the bold new move, one of which was accelerating defendable space. General Hyten testified at a recent STRATCOM posture hearing regarding his view that the U.S. military should eventually stand up a separate branch for space domain, but that now is not the right time to do so. Do you share that view, or do you feel differently about it?
Senator, I feel that the United States is the best in the world at space, and our adversaries know it. and they will seek to deny, they're developing the capabilities to deny us the ability to freely operate in space in crisis or war. This budget reflects an alignment to the American leadership. The President has set out a national security strategy and a national space strategy, restarted the Space Council, which the Vice President is chairing. Secretary of Defense and the Air Force are all aligned on the need to accelerate capabilities, which are here in the President's budget. We are building a more lethal and more agile force. And I think this fiscal year 19 budget has a significant commitment to being able to defend ourselves on orbit.
So does that mean you think we don't need to set up a separate Space Force, at least in the foreseeable future?
Senator, we are open to discussing ideas that people have in this realm. I think the most important thing is not the organization, but what we actually do. And that is to defend ourselves on orbit and make clear to any adversary that if they take us on in space, we will prevail.
And is there a role for our National Guard in the space domain?
Senator, we have National Guard units that are involved in space, in aspects of space, as well as reserves.
Thank you. General Goldfein, you were talking about our efforts in Kaliningrad, and I know one of the things that our European allies are very interested in is our support for the European Deterrence Initiative. Can you talk about what more the Air Force is doing to support that initiative?
Yes, sir. You know, we talked earlier a little bit about our stable presence in the Pacific. The air component story in Europe is actually slightly different. We've taken down significantly over time, and we as an Air Force have gotten just so much smaller over time. I mean, if I'd been the chief in 1991 with the Secretary, you know, we'd be talking to an Air Force of just shy of 1 million active Guard reserve civilians. And just to give you one force element, 134 fighter squadrons. You know, when today we have 56 total and 670,000. So a lot of that reduction came in Europe. And so with this smaller force, the European Defense Initiative from the air component perspective has been investment in access and basing, so we can take this smaller force and push it forward very quickly to compete, deter, and then win if required, working side by side with our NATO allies. So that's why you've seen so much investment in basing, so much investment in infrastructure as our part of EDI, and I think as we go forward, you'll see that continue.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Shaheen. Senator Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General, the RC-135 is the latest in a family of platforms that have served as the backbone of the Air Force's manned ISR missions since 1962. And I'm very proud that Nebraska's 55th Air Wing at Offutt Air Force Base is the home of this very unique mission. And as we race to match the pace of new threats, it is critical that we adequately fund this aircraft. The FY 2019 Air Force budget requests funds to make upgrades to the platform. And how have global threats generated a need for this capability?
Yes, ma'am, thank you. Not only is it a critical capability, as you know, it's a critical capability for our allies, and we share this with the United Kingdom, who has this capability as well. So we're finding that this particular capability, without going into the operational details on what happens on that airplane, as we look at peer threats and the return to great power competition, our ability to understand the global picture, to be able to ensure that we understand more than our adversaries and can then decide and act in ways that can produce dilemmas for our adversaries and enhance 21st century deterrence. The RC-135 is central to that effort, and it will remain so.
You mentioned it's important for our allies. What about our combatant commanders? What do you hear from them?
Same. As a matter of fact, the demand signal for RC-135 and its capabilities are going up, especially as we look at the peer competitors, the China, the Russia threats. When we look at our posture, vice Iran, North Korea. And it's been very successful in our fight against violent extremism. So it actually works across the spectrum of conflict.
You've also requested funds to convert 3 KC-135R aerial refueling tankers into a specialized WC-135R aircraft used to detect evidence of nuclear detonations? And how will this conversion, I guess, help to improve the WC-135R mission?
It allows us to give more time to be able to continue to accomplish this mission, because the current airplanes are old, they're wearing out. Our mission capable rates, and more importantly, our aircraft availability rates to be able to do this mission are much lower than not only the Secretary of Defense, but the combatant commanders required to do that mission. So being able to convert this into the KC-135 gives us more longevity for that critical mission.
Okay, thank you. And I would also like to thank the dedicated men and women that we have at the 55th Wing and the missions that they perform. Madam Secretary, the Air Force's physical infrastructure is essential to the lethality and the readiness of our nation's forces, both key goals of the NDS. Put simply, maintaining readiness means maintaining our runways. Unfortunately, there are several instances where Air Force installations are operating with runways in increasing states of deterioration and in need of substantial repair. Offutt, in my home state of Nebraska, is one such example, and while I am encouraged that the Air Force is working on a planned solution, I do worry about this in a systemic sense as an issue. To what degree do you believe the Air Force is experiencing a larger runway maintenance problem?
Senator, I've actually stood on that runway and seen some of the problems with the concrete there, and it did not last to the extent it was supposed to. And as the engineers there know, and as you know, there were problems in the way they built that runway, and it's going to have to be replaced earlier than it should have been. We do not see that as a systemic problem across the Air Force. I think it was a problem with that contractor.
I thank you for your interest and your commitment to the runway at Offutt, and I thank you for coming to stand on the runway. It is important to see that firsthand, the issues that our airmen are facing there. What system do you have in place to monitor the risk that is posed to installations, though, as a result of any kind of degradation to the runways?
Senator, we have civil engineers who are at our bases who monitor the condition of the runways and other critical facilities.
And do you believe that's sufficient to mitigate any risk?
Senator, I do, but I can also kind of take that for the record and go back and push on that a little bit if you would like me to.
Okay. I thank you very much, and I appreciate your support for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Fisher. Senator Heinrich.
Thank you, Chairman. Secretary Wilson, General Goldfein, welcome to you both. I wanted to ask you a little bit about the plans by the Air Force to divest of its HH-60G Pavehawks as the new whiskey models become available. The entire New Mexico delegation wrote to you a few months ago and expressed support for transitioning some of those legacy helicopters to the 150th Special Operations Wing. Doing so would help the Air Force with pilot production, but also help alleviate the stress on the 58th Special Operations Wing to train both the legacy and the new airframes. So as the Air Force upgrades to the HH-60W combat rescue helicopter, would you agree that an interim location using the legacy airframe would be beneficial to that transition for either of you?
Yes, sir, and we appreciate that option, and we're looking into it, so we do agree.
I'd very much appreciate it if you'd look at the New Mexico Air National Guard as having the potential to fill that role. Secretary Wilson, I was really encouraged to see the Air Force prioritization on modernization in this year's budget. It is a very welcome focus. I am, however, concerned that it's not necessarily adequately reflected in the basic and applied research accounts, which is really the foundation for a lot of the defense labs. So the FY19 budget request increases RDT&E by almost 19%, but the basic and applied research line stayed pretty flat. Do you think we're putting enough emphasis right now on basic and applied research?
Senator, I actually share your concern. Our research, development, test, and evaluation did go up significantly in this budget, but it is more on the test and evaluation end of things. We have a science and technology strategy review underway to help identify what are the areas where the Air Force needs to focus for the future, and how can we best conduct that research. We expect that review to be done this fall and into the end of the year, and that will help guide us towards the future.
I'm, very happy to see the focus on RDT&E. I just worry that if we don't pay attention to that foundation, that it's going to catch up to us. One of the other things I wanted to ask your opinion on, Secretary, I've long been an advocate for a more resilient and responsive space architecture that allows us to move faster and counter threats that we're facing in the current environment. So I was incredibly pleased to see that the Space Rapid Capabilities Office received such priority and resources in this year's budget request. Can you just talk a little bit about the importance of this newly designated Office, Space Rapid Capabilities, and how it's going to contribute to our nation's resilience and fit into the overall architecture?
Senator, the Operationally Responsive Space Office has been renamed the Space RCO. There are 4 different satellites that office is working on now. But I think even more than just renaming the office, we've been going through a series of sprints with the Space and Missile Systems Center since December of 2 and 3 weeks in duration to look at how do we buy satellite systems, how do we need to change the way in which we buy satellite systems. One of there are a number of results of that work, but one of them will be to robust or strengthen the Space Rapid Capabilities Office to be able to drive forward on prototyping and rapid responses to combatant commander needs.
Great. General Goldfein, I wanted to ask you a little bit about light attack aircraft. You recently announced that the Air Force will undergo another experiment at Holloman this year rather than the originally planned combat demonstration. How's this experiment going to be different than the one conducted at Holloman last year?
Sure, 3 ways. Number one, we're taking a really deep dive on this one on the sustainment aspects of it, how many maintainers we need, how do we sustain it both at home and forward. We determined that we could actually get a better outcome by not doing a combat experience downrange, but doing an experiment at Holloman Air Force Base like we did last time. Second, we're looking at this through the lens of allies and partners, because a big part of the light attack experiment is a common architecture and information intelligence sharing network, so that those who would join us would be able to be part of the counter-violence, the campaign against violent extremism. And the third thing that we're looking at is how do we integrate this particular weapon system in ways that allows us to get to a price point where those that we're affecting in the fight against violent extremism for the long term, that we're able to do that in the $2,000 per flying hour range over time, as opposed to the $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 per flying hour range. Given the fact that we're going to be in this for a long time, it's a condition. It's why it's been in the National Defense Strategy. So as we go look at this, we are hopeful that we will get the outcomes that will allow us possibly to come back to you and look at even accelerating this to the left, if in fact we think that's worth pursuing.
I look forward to that. It has taken quite a long time to get this moving, so we're looking forward to seeing that capability fielded. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Heinrich. Senator Rounds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Wilson, General Goldfein, first of all, thank you for your service to our country. Secretary Wilson, you said that if you currently have a bomber base, you'll be getting a B-21. You'll be getting the B-21. We're very happy with that decision, and we're looking forward to getting the B-21 at Ellsworth Air Force Base. The aircraft is expected to arrive in the mid-2020s, which is only about 7 years away. To prepare for the arrival, there are significant amounts of work that have to be completed. The MILCON work that would have to be done is going to take some time. I've just got a couple of questions with regard to what the planning is for this particular movement. It's my understanding that the Air Force still must complete the strategic basing process in order to make the B-21 basing decision official. Am I correct in that assumption, and when would this be done?
Senator, you are correct that if you have a bomber base now, you'll have a bomber base in the future. We expect a minimum of 100 B-21s, so as a minimum. The rest of the fleet will be B-52s. The chief has also directed a review of the entire number of squadrons that we have of all kinds of aircraft in light of the National Defense Strategy, which should be done by the end of August. We would not expect to move forward with a strategic basing initiative in the near term, honestly, because this is still 7 years out or so. If we get a validation of numbers, I suppose we could move forward earlier on it, but there's really probably not a need to move on it for another couple of years at least.
That's the reason for my question. It would appear to me that with the amount of work, the military construction that's going to have to be done, and the fact that it's going to have to move through an appropriations process, it seems to me that there would be, at some point, a plan in which the MILCON would start to become a part of that process. That's really what my question is how soon would it be before we expect to see the Air Force making recommendations with regard to MILCON activity for these improvements in those bases in order to be able to receive the B-21 in a timely fashion?
Senator, I wouldn't. It's not on my radar screen now for the basing actions that we expect in the near term, and so the B-21 will start coming on in the mid-2020s, and then there's a ramp up after that. I suppose I will take this under advisement as to whether we should move this forward to give communities some certainty. But I don't know, Chief, do you have anything on the bomber structure, the force structure?
Yes, ma'am. So, sir, what I would just offer is that if you look at our MILCON submission, this budget, our priority starts with new mission MILCON, and then we go to combatant commander critical requirements, and then we get to what we call worst first, those worst facilities that we've got to build across all of the major commands. So the top of our submission is in new mission bed down. So that's why you see MILCON going in on the F-35, MILCON going in on the KC-46. So the process that we use to align that MILCON with new mission to ensure that it's in place before the aircraft arrive, because you've got to be able to do the maintenance and sustainment of the weapon system before you actually operate it, that same process will be used for the B-21.
So what I'm hearing you say is that you simply, because of the time frame, you've got other items such as the 135 that's got to be bed down first, and that's where your priority is going to be for the next couple of years with regard to the MILCON mission. Am I saying that correctly?
Senator, we generally don't plan MILCON outside of the 5-year window. And so this is for us beyond the 5-year window of where we would be planning.
Today, just now, once again, we've used the term that we would have a minimum of 100 B-21s, or at least that's the structure today. Isn't it about time that we really start talking about what our needs are and about what the real discussion should be? I mean, I understand that when we're talking about 100 aircraft, there's a cost involved because on a per copy basis, the more you build, the less expensive per copy it can become. And the sooner you have certainty with regard to that, perhaps the better off we all are in terms of how we budget for it. Isn't it fair to say that under most analyses that have been done, we're somewhere between 170 and 200 B-21s, or at least that number of bombers, necessary to fulfill the missions as you currently understand them?
Yes, sir. And that's why I've directed the study that will be done by August on exactly what the size of the Air Force needs to be: bombers, fighters, command and control, personnel recovery, all those elements that we bring to do the missions of the Air Force. The National Defense Strategy, the Secretary said, we were on version 67. We had folks that were helping the Secretary of Defense with the writing of that document. We were getting periodic updates, and we were looking at the 19 budget throughout that time frame. And so as we look forward to the future, we owe you now what the size of the Air Force needs to be able to accomplish the National Defense Strategy tasks. And that's where we'll come back to you with telling you what the requirement is for the force of bombers we need. Right now, what we know is the minimum is 100. I fully expect that the requirement is going to be above that.
Let me just, for the record, ask you once again, just so that I understand it. When would you expect to be able to come back to the committee with a recommendation as to what our force should look like?
Our plan is to do that by August.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My time's expired.
Thank you, Senator Brown. Senator Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to our witnesses, thank you for your testimony here today, as always. Secretary Wilson, when you appeared before this committee in December, you said you are, and I'm going to quote you here, a big fan of the A-10, which I certainly like to hear. But I'm concerned because of a significant number of A-10s will have to be grounded unless they receive new wings, so that is a big concern. And the Air Force's fiscal year 2019 budget request included $80 million for additional wing sets for the A-10. But last week in the Airland Subcommittee, we heard testimony that the Air Force has only committed to maintaining a minimum of 6 of the 9 A-10 squadrons through 2032. Secretary Wilson, could you please clarify the Air Force's intent for the future of the A-10, and has there been a decision made to reduce from 9 to 6?
Senator, there's been no decision to reduce from 9 to 6. The current fiscal year's budget includes the funds to restart the line for the re-winging of the A-10 and to buy the first 4 wing sets. The fiscal year 19 proposal has $80 million, which should get us somewhere between 8 and 12 additional wing sets. Earlier this week, I asked our acquisition folks to see whether that production can be accelerated for delivery so that we don't have groundings, and they're taking a look at that. But there has been no decision made to reduce the number of A-10 squadrons.
And is that decision based on current funding, or will you require additional appropriations in FY19 above the budget request for the A-10?
Senator, we have the money in the budget request, I think, for between 8 and 12 additional wing sets. We haven't gotten, I don't believe we've gotten the final proposals and made a decision to be able to analyze how many wing sets per year is the maximum that industry could produce, but I may be able to get that information to you.
I'd appreciate that if you could, Secretary.
Yes, sir.
You mentioned the contracts. Could you please provide an update on the competition for the A-10 wing contract? I know there were some issues in the supply chain. Do you expect any issues in the industrial base to delay this program?
Senator, I don't expect any now, but it is a good example of supply chain problems. The prime contractor for the A-10 no longer exists. This is North American, was the aircraft producer at the time. And there are, as I understand it, 102,000 parts on an A-10 wing. So I don't know how many of those are different part types. I'm hoping a lot of them are the same rivet, but it is a complicated wing.
Right, right. With disruptive technologies making it easier and less expensive to put satellites in orbit, we are likely to see the beginning of a satellite boom. Several companies have applied for and received licenses to launch large satellite constellations in the next 20 years. Recently, as you know, SpaceX was approved to launch a constellation of more than 4,000 satellites to provide rural broadband. Certainly a very important issue for the United States, but one particularly important for me and for northern Michigan and the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. But needless to say, space situational awareness or space traffic management is going to become far more complicated in the upcoming years. Recently, Vice President Pence, as the head of the National Space Council, announced that the Department of Commerce will become responsible for a basic level of space situational awareness using data provided by the Air Force. However, I'm personally concerned that the orbital debris regulatory landscape is already extremely complicated, and adding a new organization in the Department of Commerce would probably only add to that complexity. So my question to either one of you is, what steps do you recommend to improve our whole-of-government approach to space situational awareness? And what role specifically should the Air Force play, and what other agencies and departments do you want to see in leading roles?
Senator, a number of questions there. The Air Force has been doing notification of possible collisions in space since the 1950s, not only for the United States, but for the world and for companies. We track any object greater than about a softball size, and there are 20,000 of those currently orbiting the Earth. Last year, our group out of Vandenberg, California, gave notice of about 300,000 potential collisions in space. We are increasing our space situational awareness capabilities. We have 4 satellites on orbit. We will put 2 more satellites on orbit for co-orbital space situational awareness, but we also have a ground-based system to be able to watch things and not just keep a catalog, but to be able to see things in near real time. So if anything is moving, we figure out why, and we're able to protect our assets on orbit. With respect to who we cooperate with, I had a meeting last week with the Secretary of Commerce. They are going to come out to our Schriever War Game this fall, and we will have a civil cell there so they can start to learn how we do this now. We're quite happy to move that to the Commerce Department and stand up their capability. The sensors will probably all come from us, but there may be some advantages to having the Commerce Department doing this as well. There are other sources of data on space situational awareness, and they may be able to do some things that, honestly, right now, our sensors track and we notify off of our sensors. They may be able to do some additional things based on other people's data sets, and that may be an advantage for all of us.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator Peters. Senator Cotton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, General Goldfein, thank you for being here today. I'm sorry I'm late. I just came from the White House arrival ceremony for President Macron. I will say that your Air Force platoon performed excellently, almost as good as the Army platoon. Secretary Wilson, we passed a 2-year budget a couple months ago and an omnibus spending bill for the rest of this year. Obviously, that's given a bit of a reprieve from the budget caps and sequestration under the Budget Control Act. However, we still have to implement the second year of that budget agreement. Could you explain to me the impacts that continuing resolutions have had on the Air Force and why it's important that we pass a DoD appropriations bill in a timely fashion this summer?
Yes, sir. Senator, I think that nothing has done more damage to the United States Air Force than budget uncertainty or sequester over the last decade. And certainty allows us to do things like work with industry to maximize the munitions production up to industry capacity. It allows us to sign contracts other than in the last half of the year. So probably the most important thing is industry certainty. We have not sequestered ourselves this year. We have acted as if the budget was ultimately going to be passed. But the uncertainty with industry is a major issue.
Thank you. And then, of course, we'll be back in this situation in about 18 months because the last 2 years of the Budget Control Act, fiscal years 2020 and 2021 remain. I assume that it's imperative that Congress act to eliminate those caps and the risk of sequestration for the same reasons for those 2 fiscal years?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. The Air Force's unfunded priorities list states that the ground-based strategic deterrent and long-range standoff weapon programs are both expected to run out of funding by the end of the year due to accelerated timelines. Please explain a little bit more about the acceleration of the timelines of those programs.
Senator, they're ahead of schedule. They're making very good progress, and they are ahead of schedule.
So that's a good news story, then, not a bad news story.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. What impact, if any, would the Air Force face on these programs if it does not receive the extra funding that is identified in that unfunded priorities list?
Senator, our unfunded priorities list this year, because of the increase in the money that the Congress appropriated in the budget deal, is actually smaller than it's ever been, at least in probably the last decade. But what we did in those unfunded priorities, which we're required by statute to provide, is accelerate things that are already in our 5-year plan. So pull more things to the left if there were additional top line. We are actually executing on the nuclear modernization, on the research and development phase of that faster than we thought, and that would be a good place to keep the progress going.
Thank you. General, how many fighter aircraft does the Air Force have today?
Certainly currently have 2,151 aircraft.
How many are combat coded?
Approximately 75% of those.
A little over 1,500 then?
Yes.
Okay. So you are in compliance with the NDAA provision from a couple years ago?
We are.
To maintain a minimum of 1,900 aircraft and 1,100 combat coded. Does the new national defense strategy have any impact on what our requirements are today for both total aircraft and combat-coded aircraft?
It does. And in fact, we are going to be coming back to this committee by August with our assessment of what not only the number of aircraft, but more importantly, the number of squadrons that are required, not only with fighters, but with fighters, bombers, command and control, personnel recovery, all those elements that are required to successfully support the national defense strategy. And to the previous discussion on A-10, we discussed earlier that, we have gone from 134 fighter squadrons to 56. One of the reasons that the Secretary and I are looking at all of those fighter squadrons, because the last thing we want to do right now is get smaller. We need to work with this committee to get larger and make sure that we can source the number of airframes, the maintainers, the people, and the squadrons we need to adequately support the strategy.
Thank you, General. And Madam Secretary, thank you for your visit to Arkansas to sit with our National Guard and Little Rock Air Force Base.
Thank you, Senator Cotton. Senator Hirono.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Wilson, peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific is essential, and I'm glad that you are paying a lot of attention to the region, given its importance. You've made some recent visits to the region, which also included a stop in Hawaii, where you discussed recognizing that we've returned to an era of great power competition and that adversaries in the Indo-Pacific area are rapidly modernizing, and we need to keep pace in this highly contested region to ensure our national security. And from your visits, as well as your thinking about the region, being the Indo-Asia-Pacific region, what concerns you most as Secretary of the Air Force?
Senator, what concerns me most is the pace of innovation of China and their rapid growth in their military capabilities.
So do your budget requests reflect recognition that you have a concern and that we're stepping up in terms of our pace of modernization acquisitions?
Senator, I think it does.
Do you believe additional assets and investments are needed for the Air Force to maintain its competitive advantage against our adversaries in the Indo-Pacific region? If so, in what areas?
Senator, we've put an unfunded priorities list together that would accelerate things faster. I would say that one of the things we are trying to do in the Air Force is to accelerate the pace of acquisition, to do more prototyping, more experimentation, to use the authorities that this committee has given us to get to capability faster from the lab bench to the flight line faster. And I think there are no more authorities. You've given us a lot of authorities. We now have to execute on those authorities.
You talk about your concern, pace of innovation of China. So in what areas are they innovating that causes you great concern? General?
Ma'am, I'll talk first and foremost about some of the work they're doing in space. It's very aggressive. We built our space architecture in an era where space was a rather benign domain. And so as the Secretary has laid out, we're very focused and taking some bold moves in this budget to increase our ability to defend what we have in space. And I would also tell you that in areas of hypersonics, in the areas of some of the game-changing technologies that we have investments in, we're also watching very clearly what China is investing in the same.
What about Russia? Aren't they investing in the space domain?
They are investing, but they don't have the economic base that China has to be able to advance this quickly.
Okay. General, you are an advocate of Air Force readiness, consistently testifying on its importance, and I also believe in the importance of readiness for our airmen. This March, I visited the Guard unit at Joint Base Pearl Harbor-Hickam, where I revisited a readiness challenge that I have been working on with Air Force leadership for a number of years now. And the challenge involves adversary air capability, and you're nodding because I think you're familiar with the situation in Hawaii. There, the Guard unit is forced to go F-22 against F-22 in many cases. Unlike other bases, Joint Base Pearl Harbor-Hickam does not have T-38s or aggressor squadrons that are there to conduct adversary air operations. I understand that the Air Force is looking at some commercial solutions for adversary air. And of course, I'd like to see T-38s or other aggressors based at Joint Base Pearl Harbor-Hickam as a future goal. But in the meantime, as you work the new contract adversary air capability, are there other solutions being considered?
Ma'am, primarily we're looking at this from a contract solution for Hawaii specifically. I will tell you this is a home station training challenge. When those squadrons deploy to Red Flag, to Alaska, to other areas, they're able to actually then train against a robust adversary. Mm-hmm. When they train in the simulator, they're able to train now against a rather robust adversary. This is about filling that gap for daily home station flying training. And the primary vehicle we're looking to fill that gap is through a contract.
So you're telling me that you're making progress so that our airmen do not have to go F-22 against F-22, because that is not the way we would like to use our resources.
Less than optimum, yes, ma'am.
Okay, one more question. Secretary, it's both of you. I know you often have to weigh priorities in readiness, modernization, and additional capabilities versus MILCOM. In your recent MILCOM FY19 budget request, the Air Force states that MILCOM investments support the combatant commander's highest construction priorities, such as the posture of forces in Europe and Indo-Pacific resiliency. I am encouraged by the prioritization of MILCOM investments in the Indo-Pacific region in support of your mission. Can you discuss very briefly the importance of MILCOM investments to improve your capabilities to deter our adversaries in the Indo-Pacific region? We'll just go with you, Secretary Wilson.
Senator, I take the point, and it is a priority not just to put MILCON in the Pacific, but to pursue agile basing in the Pacific and the ability to move in unpredictable ways in a crisis and disperse forces. I would say that our budget, when we look at the actual numbers and the way things fell out, we may have overemphasized the European Defense Initiative a little bit and possibly underemphasized what we're doing in the Pacific Security Initiative a little bit, and that seems to show up on the agile basing issue.
But because of your understanding of the importance of the Indo-Asia Pacific area to our national security, you are placing more emphasis on what we need to be doing there.
Yes, Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Mr. Chairman.
Bruno. Senator Ernst.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much. General Goldfein, thank you for mentioning Iowa Colonel Bud Day. He is gone, but will never be forgotten. He really is a true hero to so many of us. Secretary Wilson, thank you very much for your service. It's good to have you in front of the committee. I'm going to start with an issue that has been very important to me and for our aviators, something that I continue to be concerned about, the physiological episodes that our aviators experience, and it's burdening not just the Navy, but our Air Force pilots as well. In March alone, we have 12 episodes that were reported amongst the T-6 trainer aircraft fleet. And last week, during the Navy hearing, Secretary Spencer provided an update to the committee on some of the efforts that the Navy and the Air Force have undertaken to solve this problem. And as I told him, the fact that we have not been able to find the root cause is very disturbing. Secretary, do you have any updates for the committee from the Air Force's perspective?
Senator, we are working with the Navy and with NASA as well as with different elements of the Air Force to try to bear down on a root cause and figure these out. We actually, the most recent incidents have been with the T-6, which both the Navy and the Air Force fly. We pulled all of ours off the line, took out those systems, rebuilt the systems. We now have about over 270 of them back flying, but we have experienced some other incidents. We have, in recent weeks, set up a safety investigation board, which for the Air Force has the advantage of being able to get information without consequence. And we've used that mechanism in the Air Force in the past to get more information from the pilots, the maintainers, try to really figure this out. And Chief, do you want to add anything on this one?
Ma'am, I would just tell you that, just to give you a sense of how serious we took it, when we stood the whole fleet down, and I was involved in that discussion, as you might imagine, we just had too many that we couldn't connect to one particular causal effect. So when we pulled those off, we put a team of engineers, operators, physiologists, brought the Navy in, brought NASA in to really drive in. So although we have fairly high confidence that we've identified the highest break rate items that can contribute, we don't have the smoking gun yet. And we're not going to stop until we find it.
And I appreciate that. I know we have talked about in the past monitoring the oxygen that is exiting the system, and also perhaps what is coming out of the aviators as well. So monitoring the levels. I know we are studying equipment and potential equipment malfunctions. You mentioned physiologists. Are we examining the pilots as well and conducting surveys of the pilots? Maybe are they drinking too much coffee in the morning. I mean, just things like that. Is there something that maybe perhaps is going on outside of the realm of the equipment?
Yes, ma'am, and I'll just share with you that we learned a lot when we studied the F-22, and we were having some very similar issues. And because pilots, we all grow up and we go to the altitude chamber and we're actually deprived of oxygen, so we know what our individual symptoms are. And so once we recognize our individual symptoms, we know how to react. And so when we looked at the F-22, we started with an engineering analysis of the F-22, and we were going subsystem by subsystem to try to find it. It wasn't until we actually looked at the entire ecosystem with the pilot as part of that system that we determined that what we were experiencing was actually not hypoxia, loss of oxygen, but actually hypocapnia, which is a completely different issue but has very similar symptoms. So we're using the same structure of looking at the entire ecosystem of the T6 with the pilot as a part of that system.
Very good.
And that's why that Safety Investigation Board now is so important.
Very good. Again, we need to figure out the root cause of the issue, looking at all aspects there. Just very briefly, General, during our STRATCOM hearing a few weeks ago, I visited with General Hyten about the need for the United States to really articulate a new space strategy. Our last national security space strategy was published in 2011, and the threats have exponentially increased since then. Can you talk to us, please, about the need to update this national security space strategy?
Yes, ma'am, and I'll tell you that the Secretary mentioned the strategic alignment that we have right now from the President to the Vice President, who has stood up the National Space Council, and and Secretary Wilson's been very helpful to the Vice President in that. And so from the top leadership of the nation through those of us that are entrusted with the mission of space superiority, we have the strategic alignment right now, and the space strategy that the National Security Council is working its way through is going to be very important.
I appreciate it. My time has expired. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Ernst. Senator King.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Goldfein, I think you've acknowledged previously, and I think the Secretary has as well, the excessive operations and sustainment costs of the F-35. The recent estimate, I think it's GAO said $1 trillion over the life cycle of the airplane. You're the largest customer on the F-35. What do we need to do to reduce those numbers? And I think a specific question I would ask, could you give me a ratio of sustainment costs for an F-35 versus a fourth-generation fighter? Is it twice as much, a third again as much? I just want to get a flavor of what we're talking about here.
Yes, sir. So I'll start with the last part question first. So our estimates right now is that the sustainment costs of the F-35 are upwards of in some cases, upwards of about two-thirds as much or two-thirds more than what we're finding in a fourth-generation fighter. It's why you've seen me on record to say that our target for sustainment costs is the equivalent to a fourth-generation airplane. We want to get those sustainment costs so that it costs the same amount for an F-35 as we currently fly in an F-16 or an F-18, and that's because those are the airplanes we're replacing,
right?
And those are the costs that we have funded in.
Well, what I'd like to ask is, if you could give me for the record what you're doing to meet that goal, what
Absolutely.
the steps are, given the limited time we have here. But that would be very helpful. And are we making progress? And how is it played out? Different question, Madam Secretary. As the Air Force is undergoing its first full audit. First question, how's it going? Second question, how long do you think until we can get to a place for a clean audit?
Senator, the audit so far is going well. The auditors are on board. The Air Force has worked up to this over the last 2 years, so we're kind of going from spring ball into the real season. To me, the value of these audits is identifying things that we need to fix and get better. And so I would expect that it's going to be a while before the Air Force has a completely clean audit. I would say that the things that they're identifying early on as areas of concern or areas of focus are going to be, at least initially, in real property management and accountability there. So we know we're going to have some work there. But as they identify things, we'll work on them and get better.
I would urge you to make this a priority. We're all talking about funding and increasing funding. some of the pressure I get back home in Maine is they're not even audited. Why should we be spending all this additional money? And I'm just saying, as I look forward for the next few years, as we're looking toward increasing funding for what amounts to deferred maintenance in many cases, modernization, having that audit, or the closer we can get to the real audit, will be a defense for you that I think is important.
Senator, this is our first full audit this year, so we will have this is audit for the first full year.
Yeah, and I don't think anyone expects it to be a clean audit in the first year. The Navy testified, I think it would be about 4 or 5 years before they feel they're going to get to a clean audit. But I just wanted to urge you to make that a priority, because I think it's part and parcel of our funding decisions.
Yes, sir.
It'll help us to be able to provide you with the funding that you need if we can tell our constituents they're being audited, and
Yes, sir.
We're doing that work. On the pilot shortage, we've got all these projections, and I know it's a very serious problem. Senator Cotton and I had a meeting on that with a group of pilots. What about the effect of UAVs? Will that mitigate the problem 5, 10 years from now? I mean, UAV autonomous automobiles are going to change the world in the next 10 years. Is there a greater role there?
Sir, our UAVs are remotely piloted, so you still need a pilot there. We've actually recovered and put in place a recovery plan.
But do those pilots of UAVs have to be, aren't you working with they don't have to be officers, and there's a different...
Senator, for the Global Hawk, we have enlisted pilots. I would say that we don't, the pilot retention issues will be the same for enlisted or officers, because they can be hired by the airline. So we have faced that same issue. We're close to recovery for the remotely piloted aircraft, and we will continue to have the need for piloted
Close to recovery, do you mean close to where you need to be?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so UAV pilots were doing okay.
Sir, we had a deficit, and we recovered, and part of the way we recovered was there's an insatiable demand for intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, and we told the combatant commanders we can provide 60 combat air patrols a day of remotely piloted aircraft. We've got to get to recovery, because we were burning out. Pilots were flying remotely 6 days a week, 12 hours a day, never a break.
Well, let me follow up on this question as I did on my first question, where I'm out of time. For the record, if you could provide a page summary of the steps being taken to remedy the pilot shortage.
Yes, sir.
What's being done, what's working, what's not working. The conclusion from the meeting that Senator Cotton and I had was that it wasn't necessarily about bonuses. It was more about, we've got pilots that want to be pilots, and they don't necessarily want to be moved into the path toward leadership. They want to fly airplanes. So anyway, I'd like to see a little write-up on exactly how you're addressing this issue.
Senator, happy to.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator King. Senator Sullivan.